And Nicola, if we may, I'm going to start with you. Is that okay?
Of course.
Great.
Ladies first.
Yeah, great to have you here with us. So why don't you start by talking a little bit about what you think some of the practicalities are in addressing the built environment and its challenges. And I'm going to ask you, in a sense, what inspires you about that agenda, and what is it that gets you out of bed in the morning and keeps you going?
Okay, just a little easy question to get us going.
Yeah.
Well, I'll start with what inspires me.
Yeah.
So I've recently taken over as the chair of BEST, Built Environment Smarter Transformation. Many of you will know it as the Construction Scotland Innovation Centre, which I think kind of tells you a bit about what it does. They do so many amazing things, really innovative, creative things. And so Anton talked about that quadruple helix, actually, and that relationship. We sit in the middle of a spoke with academia, private, public, and communities. And we try to be there to help everybody get towards net zero. And they do so many amazing things in their innovation factory in Hamilton. Things that really tick my boxes is one is the passive house training that they do. Now, we haven't quite got to passive house standard in building regs yet, but it's the direction of travel that we can all see that we're going in. And this gives anybody who's involved in the built environment the opportunity for hands-on, really practical training. And that's great in itself. The thing that excites me is the impact it's having within the construction industry. We're having tier one contractors, 5 of the big tier one contractors from across Scotland coming together to work together to learn how to build passive house. And they come into our factory and they practice and they get all the detailing right. They bring their supply chains with them and then off they go and they build these schools, colleges and houses as well. And the feedback I had from one of them was not only are they building really good buildings, but the staff are happier. And they're happier because they're focusing on quality. They're working collaboratively as teams. Nobody is really kind of cracking the whip, telling them you've got to get it done. It's got to be done right because Passive House requires constant accreditation all the way through the process. And the biggest benefit, and again, this week is Mental Health Awareness Week, the staff are saying they feel happier, they feel as though they've got much more pride in their work. And what a wonderful positive spin-off from doing the right thing in terms of building to then give the right kind of feeling to your employees. So that's the kind of thing that gets me out of bed in the morning.
Fantastic. So I'm going to ask them all the same questions, by the way, but we're going to get different answers. So Billy, I'm going to come to you. What inspires you in this space of the built environment and climate?
Yeah, I think from the SEC's point of view, we compete in the global market in many events. For example, hosting COP was a great event to come to the UK. We compete regularly on the world stage, so we have to look at how our campus can be sustainable, how it can be modernised, and how we put our best foot forward. And I'll use a practical example. We won an event for 2026, 7,000 international delegates to come to the campus, and they sent a panel of 10 to the SEC for a week to evaluate the SEC. They evaluated the sustainability, what we did with food waste, single-use plastics, and spent a week on campus. We presented to them, and they left really positive with what we're trying to do. So we have to be competitive. We have to bring events to Glasgow, create economic impact. So it's really part of how do we keep doing that.
Great. And I think we're going to hear a bit more about that later on. And obviously, it's a very busy week this week for the Scottish Events Campus, isn't it? Let's go immediately to Roddy. Same question then. What is it that inspires you in this area of the built environment and the climate?
Yeah, my job at the university is to basically operational sustainability. So I'm constantly looking for opportunities to repurpose and reimagine the built and natural environment resources we've got. So we have 6 operating assets across West Central Scotland, 377 buildings, about 345,000 square metres of GIA. That is a footprint for us right there. But we also have opportunity to really think about how our land that we've got at Cocknoe Farm, for instance, and the built environment assets we do have to work harder for us. So lower carbon solutions around PV, the heat resources that we've got underneath the ground, the river, Clyde, 1 gigawatt of heat potential in the Clyde. We're adjacent to the Clyde, close to the Clyde, similar to the SEC. So how we reimagine in a climate emergency is a big part of why I get up in the morning, as well as the need for reducing our demand, changing behaviour, upskilling, all the things that Anton mentioned previously that a university does, against the backdrop of a significant need for change. So, yeah, that's what gets me out of bed in the morning.
God, I'm sure it does. Making me, a university that's 850 years old, thinking about a river that's many, many thousands of years old, and how those two things work together. That would get me out of bed in the morning. Graham, let's come to you. Welcome. What is it that inspires you in this area? What is it that gets you out of bed?
Well, at Austin Smith Lord, we're a multidisciplinary design practice, and by nature, that work demands that we work in collaboration with our clients, with the communities with whom we're working and whom we serve, and working in collaboration with experts and expertise, some within the room, some beyond the room. Our mission is, and our purpose is very much around enhancing life and environments by design, and the power of design as a tool to enable through co-design, to try and develop solutions to address the climate emergency, to address the social and environmental justice topics that have been talked about this morning are critical, but also starting to kind of redesign the way in which we plan, understand what goes where and why, who needs to work with whom, and so working with policymakers, working with colleagues on the panel, and working with third sector and academia, that's something that really inspires us, and using that in a way that can then be applied to enhance everyday quality of life and tackle not only the issue of decarbonisation, but the ways in which that then touches upon the health, well-being and the economic agenda as well.
Great, thank you very much, Graham. And I've got a second question that I'm going to put to them all. But before we do that, I'm going to come to you, Billy, because there's a question here that's been lingering in my inbox since about 9 o'clock this morning. And it says, why are certain processes that are trailed for large sporting events and then removed afterwards, e.g. a travel card that covered all the modes of transport? Why are they removed afterwards? Why couldn't we keep that kind of thing going that we've done for special events in the city, where we really incentivise people to use public transport, for example? Is there any reason we can't keep all of that going?
We've seen it through COP, through other events such as Commonwealth Games, but it's really not in our gift to do it. We're the venue. We host over 300 events a year, so it's part of a wider policy. So it's not really the SEC's gift to do it.
Great. So people need to talk to the Scottish Government and the Council to get that done, do they?
Yes.
Yes, they do. Okay, great. So my next question is really about innovation, because our brilliant panellists have talked about what inspires them. But I really want to know now, what are the innovations that you think are able to make a difference? And I'm also going to ask you, how do we take them to a scale where they're having a meaningful impact on what we're trying to achieve here? And Nicola, it's back to you.
Oh, thank you. One of the things that's been touched on a lot today is retrofit and the challenge. And do you know, it doesn't sound innovative because it's actually a really hard thing to do. And we can have great creative ideas out here, and it might help some typologies of buildings. But a lot of the buildings that we have, the existing housing stock, the existing factory and office stock is already there. So what we're building new is not going to make a massive difference in changing the dial. So retrofit is so important. Now at the Innovation Centre, we have 2 factories. We recently opened one officially, and our previous First Minister, Humza Yousaf, opened it in February. And it's the National Retrofit Centre. So not only inside the building will we be doing a lot of work on retrofit and learnings and teachings and training, but the building itself is going to get retrofit. We've just received a £1.2 million grant to retrofit this steel frame factory. Now, I was there in February when we did the open, and I really wish it had been retrofit because it was freezing in there, and the poor First Minister, nobody had told him bring a coat, and he was shivering. So you know, people are working in these places, and we have to make sure that we are providing accommodation that is comfortable for people to work in, as well as the net zero agenda. So this retrofit project is going to be a living lab. So anybody else who has this kind of property within their own portfolio, if you're a landlord, and we have thousands of these boxes all over the UK, come and see us as we retrofit it. Come and learn from us. We're going to be putting digital monitoring in so we can measure the performance. We won't get it right all the time. We talked about that earlier. We can make mistakes and we can learn from them. And then we can share the knowledge, because we can't individually scale up everything, but we can share our knowledge and collaborate with others, so that ripple effect goes right across the country, and that's when we'll make meaningful change.
Great. So retrofit will be the one. And did you want to just say something else about taking to scale? Is it to do with the way you do the retrofitting here and how it becomes replicatable? What are the scaling issues with it?
I think we just need to be careful we're not reinventing the wheel all the time in our little silos around the country. So open source data, being really honest about what's gone wrong, learning from each other, sharing the knowledge, amplifying all the lessons, because I don't think we can rely on one organisation or one pot of money or one solution. I mean, there's a lot, if you talk about retrofitting of housing, which is my background, there are so many different housing typologies. We talk about air source heat pumps. We can't realistically put those into the tenements of Edinburgh and Glasgow. So we have to look at different solutions for those buildings. But let's find out the solutions and share, and make sure that we are sharing that as widely as we can with all the actors in that space, and not being protective, which I think can be in the natural way of private business. It's my intellectual property and I want to have the competitive advantage. But if we don't succeed in the climate change, crisis, to what end?
Yeah, so the whole idea of collaborative advantage becomes important, doesn't it? Let's go, if we may, then to Billy and ask you the same question. What's the innovations that you're pursuing, and how can they be taken to scale?
Yeah, I'll just add to the point that Nicola made about retrofit. I think there's a fear out there of retrofit, and I'll use a practical example. At the moment, we are renewing our LAN and Wi-Fi network. It's 12 years old. We're spending almost £4 million on it. We put it in 12 years ago. When we put it in, it was, how do you monetize it? How do people pay for it? And now it's a given. It's not monetized. It's part of it. So my view is that retrofit is part of the way going forward. When you're replacing assets, renew them in a green way. So that's part of what we're doing. We've carried out a retrofit study. We now have an off-gas solution, the SEC. In terms of our plan, we've developed a very comprehensive net zero strategy, and we've looked at things that may work or not work. And I think, picking up from what Nick said earlier on today about collaboration, we've looked at many aspects of this. So, for example, we looked at wind. It would give us great output, but it doesn't work. So we look at our neighbours. We looked at hydrogen. Doesn't work. At some point, maybe a refuelling station on site as live touring decarbonises. But our strategy is very much around get off gas, generate on site, and get efficiencies in our campus. So the first thing that we've done through things like LED installs and actually a real great staff education programme, we've reduced our carbon footprint by 38% in the past 3 years. So we can see real data on it now. To go further on that, we will use the river. So we'll use the river for heating and cooling. We'll go off gas and we'll host a river source heat facility that will serve not just the SEC but the wider area. So it will serve far more than what we will do. We also did a geothermal desktop feasibility study. The outputs are phenomenal. They would heat maybe 20% of the city. We won't pursue that at the moment because there is risk to that, but it's there. It's there if someone wants to pick up the mantle, and there's a good investment in it. So the river's a really good part of it. We will start our solar PV install this year. The latest data is it will produce 63% of our daytime power use in the SEC. We can run over 120 days a year with on-site generation. And how good a message would be at All Energy next year to say that we will run the event from on-site generated power. And then as the heat network installs, will come off gas, so therefore it'll be a carbon-free event. To support that as well, we'll install battery. So again, we've got a nighttime economy, so we will use during the day. again, some days we don't have an event on, we have an event night, we'll store it, we'll use the power, so we don't waste any of it. We'll EV charging, overlay that with the retrofit study, and overlay with some other off-site and assets we're looking at in conjunction with Glasgow City Council, and we'll head to a net zero position. Backing all that is infrastructure. COP was a great catalyst for infrastructure. We put an electrical infrastructure on the campus. We've recently completed a 32 MVA substation in conjunction with Spain. That would power the SEC 8 times over. So it does massive electrical infrastructure, probably the most unconstrained site in the UK for a green future. So that's part of what we're doing, as well as our expansion, building a net zero hotel and pulling it all together as one project.
And I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, that you have established the ambition to be the first net zero event campus in the world. Is that right?
Yeah, we've also published a 2030 roadmap. So
Yeah.
that's out, we've shown the steps, and we've shown the years, and we're out public, and that's what's there. Our sectors demand it. They demand that you push forward. It's became the #1 ask of any of the events we bid for, and that drives the economic impact massively. So we have to be at the forefront of it.
Great. So a quick poll of the audience. Who would like to see the Scottish Events Campus in Glasgow be the first net zero event campus in the world? If you would, please raise your hands. Thank you. If anybody doesn't want that, could you raise your hands? So, Roddy, what help do you want from, Billy, what help do you want from them?
From the audience?
Yeah, what do you want from them?
Yeah, I think the key word's collaboration. You know, I've spent time with Roddy, Nicola and I are engaging today. We're going to host the board meeting, your next board meeting at site. We're going to bring the experts down. It's all about chatting. You know, I'm the finance guy, the background. I get kilowatt hours and kilowatts mixed up.
Yeah.
But you can develop a strategy with the right people around you.
Yeah.
You can understand the assets you have to use. So it's about collaboration, more chat. Some great chats last night, and I'll continue the chats. And invite anyone to come and see what we want to do, because everywhere there is people with great ideas.
Because I imagine this as Glasgow's 4th innovation district, right? This is the innovation district for the built environment, and you're doing it. So absolutely fantastic. Hats off to you. Roddy, what about the innovations that you're looking at, and how do you take them to scale?
Yeah, so we're seeking to make all of our assets, the 6 operating assets that we've got, energy carbon neutral in operation and climate resilient. So we haven't really talked about the changing climate that we have significant different typologies of buildings. So, some respond well to changing climate, some less so. So that systems approach is our kind of innovation. So thinking about the finance, thinking about how to operationalize these interventions in a live university. We can't close. We're heavily intensive research facilities across our assets. So, we have to think about how the systems that we adopt can support that. So some of the things we're looking at that I would say are more innovative, because I'm not sure they're truly innovative, are we're looking at that circular approach to heat. So a big part of our footprint is gas, not surprisingly. We're lucky, again, this is really why I get out of bed, because we're really lucky where we're placed in dense urban environments. We have access to waste heat from the sewer. Without going into detail, there's a huge amount of heat in that network, which we're adjacent to at Gilmer Hill in the West End. So we're working collaboratively with Scottish Water and with their technology partner. We think we can transition using a waste heat resource away from gas into our existing 6-kilometre network of district heating that we've got. And we want to expand that further, and we're making plans to do that. So that will significantly change our footprint for that gas by around 62%. And it's adjacent. It can link into our existing network. It can also think about our community responsibility, so we can transition to other parts of the city in that network zone. It's aligned with Scottish Government policy. It's aligned with the local council's LHES, Low Carbon Heat and Energy Efficiency Strategy. But what it isn't aligned with is power. So we need access to clean, affordable power. Our energy bill has tripled over the last 5 years. We're not in control of it. So innovation around how we generate, store and manage energy at a local place-based level for our business, our core function of research and teaching and excellence in that, but also our responsibility as a civic institution to think about our communities and the businesses, SMEs, large and small, around our places So that place-based focus is hugely important. It's a significant strategic imperative for us. So, you know, that's one particular scalable solution that drives a larger heat network. It uses a resource that generates a revenue from for our water company. You know, a national asset, a strategic asset. So we think that's the right track for that particular asset. But we've got 5 other assets to decarbonise and make climate resilient. So we are looking at lots of different energy vectors, but also with a community focus at the core of what we do. We want to be able to offer people and places access to that heat network as much as our own access and our own priorities. So we think that's helpful to our society.
So you become a hub of a district network where you're able to share the costs and benefits with other people. But because you're the anchor, you're able to drive the investment for the transition.
Yeah. So we need to de-risk those investments. And I think being an anchor institution with a strong covenant, we're not going anywhere. We're not going to up sticks and move somewhere else. We are rooted in our commitment to our communities and our place within Glasgow and the city region.
Thank you so much. And questions are flooding in. I want to hear from Graham first, but do keep sending your questions. And if they're for a particular person, do say so, because otherwise I'm going to put them around slightly randomly. Graham, thinking about the innovations that you're involved with, what are the key innovations and how do you get them to scale?
You've had the great privilege of being a lead consultant on the recently completed district regeneration frameworks for Glasgow City Centre, looking at 400 hectares of the city centre. And it was an opportunity to speak with anchor institutions, just as we've been hearing the power of those anchor institutions to be part of the drive for that change, but also working with local resident and business communities and the wider civic community in the city centre to understand the adjustments and the changes that need to be made to enhance the everyday experience of the city, but also to face into the big issues and scale up and address the issues of decarbonising the city centre. In our own practice and in our own work, we've had the joy and benefit of being involved in greening the grey of the quaysides down at the Science Centre. So we did the outer space project just over the river from the SEC, looking at ways in which to improve biodiversity, to take a nature-based solutions approach, which we heard about earlier on. Yeah. We've had the great privilege of being involved in redesigning Partick interchange, so understanding the need for that seamless integration of different modes of transport to make it as convenient and reliable as possible to encourage that modal shift. And that's coupled with our current involvement in over 54 kilometres of active travel network for the City Council, again working in close dialogue with local communities. So all of those point to a need to, I suppose, repurpose and retrofit the city. And just on that, clearly one of the big issues we're dealing with in the city centre is addressing and repurposing vacant and underoccupied space, much of it listed, much of it stubbornly underoccupied for a long period of time. So very interested to understand ways in which we can address issues of innovative policy, innovative procurement, community wealth building at a local level to really energise and capitalise on the expertise we have here in Glasgow to get things done, but also then having a really compelling message to investors and green finance beyond so that we can do it at scale. And so we were using that city centre piece as very much a kind of calling card, a prospectus in terms of what the city should be doing, needs to do, and try to make the case. And just, if you'll permit, Chair, one other thing that I'd like to say in terms of as a practice, we've also greatly benefited from the encouragement and support of the Chamber and indeed the City Council as an SME and as a member of the Chamber. We've been a participant and benefited from the Step Up to Net Zero funding, so we had the benefit of a Net Zero coordinator. So I was at least fortunate enough to be able to put my hand up earlier on when Will Hutton said, do you know what your kind of position is with respect to the carbon agenda? And I think it's fantastic that we've got that kind of level of support for SMEs, and it's opportunities like today for us to then share that knowledge, share that learning. And indeed, my temptation earlier on was just to kind of lock the doors and say, right, Greg, let's all try and work through this agenda here and now today. Because you really get the feeling that there's expertise and knowledge right across the sectors to address some of the big challenges and the big issues, not least in terms of how we upskill our young folk in the city. So again, with the Chamber, through the My Climate Path agenda and the Climate Heroes, we've been working with St Mungo's Academy in the city centre and looking to inspire young folk to think about the green economy in ways in which it doesn't have to be in the construction industry or the design professions, but ways in which they can participate and engage in this, because they have to be part of that innovative future.
Great, thank you so much. Now, you won't believe how many questions are coming in, and according to my clock, we've only got 6 minutes more. So I'm just going to say to everyone, we're going to take an extra 5 minutes here. Hope that's okay with you, Anna. Right, and because we so many questions here. Billy, there are 3 questions for you, and I'm just going to tell you what they are, and then Nicola, there's about 3 for you, and then we're going to spread it out. So, Billy, so one person says 38% reduction in SEC's carbon footprint. Could you provide some examples of the type of education you gave your employees to kind of get on side with that? And then there's a question about whether there's a scope 3 dimension in your net zero strategy, i.e. all of the induced activity that comes from third parties and everything else. And then they wanted to know what was the risk with geothermal.
Firstly, education piece. We set up training modules in our flow training system and let everyone see all the benefits of being efficient, switch off policies, etc. We also have set up a green committee, so the committee can then lead innovations and drive it through the business. So that's really useful. In terms of the geothermal, it's a desktop study. The initial well would be about £20 million. The desktop outputs are really, really strong, but you don't know the answer till you actually drill it. So it's not one for SEC to take the risk on. Right. Again, huge outputs if it's positive. And geothermal is becoming more and more popular. There's more sites in Europe, etc. We did that in conjunction with Halliburton. Halliburton drill for oil. They know how to drill for it. And as I say, every day is collaboration and a school day. Being on a call with 14 geologists, and they want to explain to you what they're doing was fascinating. Final point?
The final was about scope 3, third-party suppliers and other people who use your campus but aren't in your direct control.
Yeah, a lot of what we do is labour-driven. So very much it's the people that deliver the events, be it security, catering, etc. So the footprint there is not as big as what people think it would be. You know, we focus on reducing our waste. Things like we've brought that down from 12% our carbon footprint. We've reduced it by 75%. We do have an idea of what delegates' carbon footprint will be. We have calculated those numbers. Again, that's not in our scope, but we know where it comes from, and we've ran the data on various years, so we know what the background is of it.
Great, and I think what people are looking for perhaps in the longer term is what's the active strategy for anyone who uses the campus and how you know the standards that they have to perform to be on your campus. Nicola, there's 4 questions on retrofit, right? So one of them's a simple one, which is where are the grants, please? Do you know where the grants are? But there are 3 others. So one is, what's the big challenge in relation to retrofit? What are the risks? What makes it difficult, particularly in Scotland? Then there's one about historic buildings in the city centre, and then there's another one about residential dwellings, particularly multi-occupancy buildings. Any insights about retrofit in relation to them?
Well, firstly, if you can find the grants, please tell me. I think that is one of the biggest challenges, is that at the moment there doesn't seem to be this big pot of money where people can go and retrofit their own properties, or if you're a landlord, retrofit your properties for your tenants, although that was covered off earlier today and maybe innovative finance is on the way. Let's hope so, because I think that's the only way we're going to scale it up. Talking about the different typologies and you know, the tenement blocks, the flatted blocks, we're not going to be able to put an air source heat pump on the outside of each of these. I mean, Graham, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're going to have to look at things like district heating, you know, looking at your anchor, your anchor providers who can then provide heating. It was interesting sitting here listening. Little personal story, my daughter is at Glasgow University and lives in a really pretty old grotty flat on Byers Road. And they were too scared to put the heating on this winter because it was so expensive. And so they spent all of their time in the library because it was the only warm place to go. Now, if that's what students, middle-class students, let's face it, are doing, I hate to think what people who don't have that opportunity are doing when it's cold and they're in a drafty old flat. So retrofitting, we have to think of the fuel poverty side of it. People who cannot afford to heat their homes, how do we make sure that these buildings are warm enough? So if there is money out there, I firmly believe that it should be going to local councils to retrofit council properties, to housing associations to retrofit their properties for social tenants, because those are the people who are most affected by high fuel bills. We all are, but some of us have got, you know, a little bit more cushion where we can cope with it. And I can't remember what the other question was.
It was multi-occupancy, historic buildings.
Historic buildings.
Yeah.
One of the big challenges, and I know somebody put a question in earlier about this, is about VAT. So if you're building new build, it's 0% VAT, but if you're doing refurb in an old one, it's 20% VAT. I think if it's listed, you've maybe got some kind of leeway there. But you immediately have a very uneven playing field. So if we're going to try to bring some of these older buildings back into use, we need to make sure that the VAT system is fair. I mean, for me, I would say it would just make it 7% for everybody. You know, so it doesn't matter if you're new build or doing refurb, just level the playing field. Make it 20% for everybody. It doesn't really matter, but just make it the same for everybody. So there's no disincentive to be refurbing our old buildings, because actually the minute you start knocking buildings down, that's when you're increasing your carbon. You know, everything indicates that you should be holding on to your old buildings. I mean, look at the building we're in today. Somebody could quite easily have knocked it down and put up some flats, but we have this amazing, quirky, creative space because somebody has had the vision to say, no, let's hold on to it and make it useful. And the amount of carbon saved by doing that should not be underestimated, but they don't get rewarded for it.
No.
You know, so yeah, I think creativity, but it always comes back down to money and finance and taxation, so make it fair.
Graham, we're going to come to you because there's a range of eclectic questions, many of which are about the city centre in one way or another. So we're leveraging off the question about historic buildings, and people are saying, what do we need to do to create the right environment for preserving our creative buildings and using them again? And then there's 2 or 3 others, but go for that one first.
Okay, well, I'm glad that Nicola picked up on the VAT issue, because I've got it down here as an aid memoir and I forgot to mention it earlier on. I think that's fundamental.
Yeah.
And it's something that perhaps the Chamber and others can help to lobby. And if we're going to really look at that retrofit agenda, we need to ensure there's at least a level playing field, or better still, that we're incentivised to be retrofitting those buildings. I think the other aspect is the need to find a kind of presumptive yes with respect to a discussion when you engage with regulatory authorities in terms of how to bring buildings back in use. That's not to say that we lower the bar in terms of regulation or quality, far from it. In an era post-Grenfell, it's absolutely vital that we make sure that life safety and that fire regulations and other aspects are absolutely attended to. But trying to find ways in which we can be innovative, flexible, try and establish a kind of green tape approach to bringing back buildings that have either been long-term under-occupied or vacant, I think is absolutely crucial. There are a number of wonderful listed buildings that Glaswegians hold dear that have been long scaffolded, and oftentimes when we were speaking with them, the river and the heritage of the city centre were the 2 things that Glaswegians hold dearest, and they really do cherish these things. It's part of our collective memory, it's part of the collective story, and it's vital that we find innovative ways to bring them back. So getting round the table, all of the different participants, be it the statutory authorities, building owners, local communities, not to pass risk and liability to those that can't take it on, but to find ways in which it can be done in a fair, equitable and reasonable way, I think is absolutely crucial. And that collaborative spirit and working through solutions is something that Glaswegians very much want to see.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Graham. Now, there's 2 other questions for you. One of them builds on what you've just been saying, and it says, do you think the wider business community fully understands the potential impact that stranded assets have on the built environment?
I don't believe we do, and indeed I think it's very difficult to get a handle on the extent to which there are stranded assets, or assets where we've maybe got absent landlords, landowners in place, and even in terms of vacant and derelict land as well as built assets, that can be quite a challenge. We were fortunate enough to have Dr. Mark Robertson of Ryden on our team on the city centre piece of work, and I know that he was then commissioned alongside another collaborator of ours, Nick Skelton, to do a series of reports for the Chamber, looking at ways in which to bring back into use vacant and under-occupied space. And I think having and Mark would also say that there's a need to have a kind of hands-on approach sometimes. Quite often we've tried to let the market bring things forward and it's just not happened. And when that occurs, I think we need to be bold, we need to be brave, we need to look to the local authorities and other agencies to say it's time to step in and it's time to actually call out those landowners who are not investing or who are letting the city decay, and take them out of the game if needs be with compulsory purchase or something else.
Great. We're going to come to Roddy in a minute, but there's one more question for you, which somebody says, all these questions are from Anonymous. To tackle carbon, we can't limit by just planting trees to offset carbon or to help rewild Scotland. What should be the next step in terms of any significant carbon offset in relation to the built environment?
Well, I mean, even before you start talking about carbon offset, I mean, the fact is we've been talking in the construction industry about whole life cycle costing for years, and actually trying to understand what not only the operational and the capital and operational expenditure is, but also starting to get to grapple with issues of carbon budgets. Now, I don't know how many of us in the construction industry in the room are actually engaging in that. I can imagine that Roddy, you might be as a university doing that from time to time, but it's miles away from being mainstream. And I think if we're ever going to get talking about carbon offset, we need to understand, well, what's the carbon expenditure in Project X and Project Y? And if we're really going to try and address the retrofit agenda in terms of embodied carbon, we need to recognise the benefit of that asset in terms of embodied carbon. That then used as an incentivisation to say that's a good reason to retrofit, to retain and refurbish and repurpose, and to ensure that that's rewarded through intelligent commissioning, intelligent finance, and that green finance agenda that we spoke about, or that colleagues spoke about earlier on. So I think that we're miles away from actually understanding what the credit and debit on the balance sheet is before we can get into the offsetting. But I think that the likes of the university could really lead the way in demonstrating how that's done so that can become part of the mainstream here in Glasgow and beyond.
Well, believe it or not, that was the next question for Roddy. So you've absolutely anticipated. We're going to have 3 questions for you, Roddy, then we're going to wrap this up if we may. But there's this question about, the historic assets that the university has and the wider challenge of stranded assets around. But then there are a couple of questions where people are saying to you, what do you think is really needed to take forward the district heating and the district cooling you spoke about earlier? And also, way back in the questions, there's one about, have you considered kind of community battery solutions for the campus and those sorts of things?
Right, yes. Yes to all of those.
Yeah.
The battery one first. We're looking at storage, electrical and thermal storage, as part of a whole systems approach. So when we generate PV or wind, if we're lucky enough to be able to develop wind assets, how do we store that energy when we don't need it? We might export it, of course, but how do we play some numbers, some clever numbers that enable us to function in a carbon neutral way? So we are including electrical and thermal storage in our thoughts, particularly around assets that we have, access to the grid, such as at Garscube, where we are lucky to be quite close to a grid supply point there, and we have land there. So yes, that's part of the agenda. I think the discussion about historic assets, hugely challenging. We've got some real fabric issues to deal with, and we're not the only university in Scotland. One to the east has even more issues than we do. Our iconic West End campus, for example, we have Victorian villas, we have terraces. They're hugely cherished, they're listed, but we need to tackle, we need to, decarbonise those assets. So fundamentally, improving the fabric where we can, where we comply with the legislation, of course. But the district heating piece, that leads me into the kind of district heating piece. A, it's policy. B, there's huge opportunity and the resource is there, north and south of the river, and including the river as an energy source. So we need to build that pipeline. So that's the work that we're doing. We've got 32 feasibility projects, scalar feasibility projects these are. And these aren't just, more metering, more controls. These are, transformational projects that use existing technology, working with partners, thinking collaboratively at each of our assets in each of our places. So, you know, the heat from sewage, I know it's a horrible subject, but that's a clean resource for us because it's low carbon. It's adjacent to two of our main operating assets, our teaching hospital at the Queen Elizabeth, and of course Gilmer Hill, as I've previously mentioned. So bringing forward that opportunity, the scale of it, that's a 50, 60 megawatt asset. So it's not just the university or the first carbon neutral hospital. It's Govan, Linthouse, SIMD issues. It's Tala's BAE System, Travelodge, the shops along Govan High Street. They should all be able to generate that, you know, that benefit in terms of their cost of operation.
Yeah.
Our energy bill is X, so is yours.
Yeah. I can tell you, Roddy, the audience agrees with you. The message is, let's get on and do it. I'm going to close this up here and just ask you to join me in thanking Roddy, Nicola, Billy and Graham. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much.